LibertyNation.com does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement. On this episode of The Uprising, we continue our analysis of the Supreme Court's recent work and the political implications of their decision. And Ron DeSantis versus Donald Trump. Is it all over but the crying? We'll hear from Tim Donner. All that and more right now on this episode of The Uprising.
We are The Uprising.
Welcome back to The Uprising, a podcast of LibertyNation.com. I'm your host, Scott Cosenza. Joining me today is LibertyNation.com senior political analyst, Mr. Timothy Elting Donner. Tim, welcome back to the podcast.
Middle name this time.
You know, so throw it in there sometime. I omitted my own and added yours.
It's usually a sign of great respect, Scott.
That's true, Tim.
I appreciate it deeply.
You know, we missed you so that you could attend your Pride Month conclusion ceremonies and celebrations, and
well, I have declared
we're happy to have you
pronouns.
back.
I have declared my pronouns
In the bosom of the embrace of the uprising, and you know, we had a big week last week, Tim, with the
and by the
United
way,
States.
Just to accentuate the point that I've made here previously, I have declared my pronouns, and they are, as you know, me, myself, and I. Just wanted to remind,
and we honor and celebrate
listeners who don't just sit at rapt attention for every second of the podcast.
Well, you interrupted my flow to announce again, Tim, the big decisions from the United States Supreme Court, which I wanted to celebrate with you. We celebrated and informed in your absence last week. I know that you listened to at least some of that to present yourself with what I presented about the opinions.
Well, it didn't. I have to say, it did not conform to Pride Month, but overlooking that, there were some, decent spots in it. I guess.
Thank you. What is your political thought about? We had the student loan debt relief plan, I think, was the most politically charged of, so we presented the three big decisions last week were, to my mind, the overturning of affirmative action. Then there was the 303 creative, which is either a pro-free speech case or an anti-LGBTQIA++ case, depending on who you believe. And then we had the student loan debt relief plan go down in flames. To me, that seemed to be the most politically, for this coming election cycle sort of a thing. Now they're going to talk about affirmative action, but in terms of the actual doing of things, does Biden get a credit from certain audiences? Hey, at least I tried to do this, but I was stymied by the court, or how does that all play out?
Well, that's a good question, because the recipient or the proposed recipient of debt relief from student debt could either say, well, at least he tried and I appreciate the effort. Or they might say he knew it was going to fail. He knew it was unconstitutional to begin with, so he gets no credit. And the third thing is to look at it and say, what a cheap and transparent grab for votes. Everybody knew it at the time. Did it get him any votes is the question. Well, they did better in midterm elections, the Democrats, than they thought they would. So you could make an argument that the purely political, rank, cynical political decision by this president to simply say, I'll tell you what does it take to get your vote? Okay, how about $10,000? If I get you $10,000, will you vote for me? Well, I would imagine there are some that feel that way. It was such an unworthy. Did I say cynical? I'm sorry to use it for a third time, but
yeah, I feel like
emphasize the
I feel
point.
like I'm really being attacked personally for being a cynic, Tim. It's not my fault I'm a cynic. The world has created the cynic in me. And that is my view of.
I believe that's what I told you once about myself, but be that as it may, I think that the political result of this is essentially nothing. And Biden knew it. He knew when he provided the student debt relief. And what was really kind of gross and disgusting, as you like to say, is that it was, they cited an act from about 20 years ago that was used to relieve debt from veterans.
Well, this was
Warriors,
passed in the
people
wake
who-
of September,
people who had-
the September 11 attacks.
Right. People who had served the military, right? And
yeah.
they're using
Well,
that.
also, it was for the crisis of, so I'll just sort of set the table here for people who may not know. The HEROES Act passed in the wake of the September 11th attacks. The language that they used to try to justify this debt relief was it put in place so that veterans or people who were, basically because of this attack, they couldn't repay in a temporary emergency, that they would be basically, they could waive payments and shuffle around sort of repayment plans on a short-term basis. And that's part of the reason why the Supreme Court said that they couldn't do it this time, because it so fundamentally changed what the authorizing language of the bill said, that they said you can't delegate that much authority. And actually, I'm
trying to remember, was that a 6-3 decision, the student loan?
Yes, Tim.
Okay. So, I mean, I can't believe, honestly, that those three leftist justices really believe that it's constitutional for Biden to do what he did. I mean, the left is now whining constantly because they got dealt a bad hand because Trump got 3 appointments to the Supreme Court. And they say everything they do is political. They're just making decisions on a political basis. Well, what about the 3 liberal justices in the student debt case? I mean, to me, I'm not a lawyer, nor do I play one on TV. I attempt to on a podcast every once in a while. But, it seems to me that that is as political as you could possibly get, because this, to me, seems like it's open and shut a Supreme Court decision.
Okay. All right.
As you could get. Am I right that it's pretty much open and shut?
I disagree with you, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
There's The Wire, the TV show, I reference occasionally because it's probably one of the best TV shows that's ever existed, and I know that you haven't
enjoyed
consumed it.
Yes.
Yes. But there's a great line in it where this cop says something that is sort of like a legalistic conclusion, and this woman who he's with says, "Are you a lawyer?" And then he says, "Why would anybody who's not a lawyer pretend to be a lawyer? Like they're like the worst, basically the worst people in the world, Right. And so I always think about that.
You pretend that you weren't a lawyer
right.
when you were. Oh no, I'm not a lawyer. No.
Here's why I disagree with you. It is, and actually why I don't think that. You made a comment that made it seem like maybe the 3 justices were acting really out of political motivation rather than sort of the honest conclusions of their legal, efforts, right? And examining whether or not that the Constitution allows the use of the HEROES Act to do what they're trying to do. And I think that they actually genuinely believe it, Tim. And here's why. This is a historical push-pull between left and the right. On the constitutional sort of how we decide what the constitutional allows, and it's about delegation. And the left always favors more delegation, right? So the delegation, and this is sort of like the broadest terms. I think the easiest way to think about it is they want to pass stringent new environmental air quality regulations, but they don't want to actually set the particular levels that are required. So you have to say a car can make X amount of, pollution, carbon pollution per mile driven or something like that. They don't want to do the dirty work of it. So what they do is instead they say, EPA, clean up the air. And then it's left to the regulators at the EPA to do whatever they want to do. And then in Republican administrations, typically, in this example, the regulators turn back the dial on the regulations, and there's more energy produced more cheaply. And when the Democrats come in, well, the opposite is true, right? Now we're going to ramp up the subsidies to the renewables, and we're going to crush the coal-powered stuff. And it's not done through legislation, but it's done through the regulators. And for those of us on the right,
how does that pertain to student debt?
Well, hold on a second. For those of us on the right, and for libertarianish folks like myself, we don't favor that kind of a review, because we can never know what the actual rule is. If it's just what some regulator, who's some unnamed regulator, how do we get to decide what the actual rule is? Are we going to have inexpensive and, relatively speaking, safe coal-fired plants in this country, or are we going to have to pay 5x as much for our electric, but we're going to get renewables and
right.
less pollution? So, and that tension, Tim, between allowing delegation and not allowing delegation is what I think is at the heart of the student loan issue, and that's why it's relevant and comparable, and also why I think that for instance, so Justice Kagan and Justice Sotomayor are not the same justice, for instance, and what I mean by that is, while I think that the politics lives in the heart of Justice Sotomayor and ideology lives in her heart, I don't get the same sense from Justice Kagan.
I'm not sure that Ketanji Brown Jackson either has presented herself as sort of politically driven. Maybe she is, but I haven't seen that from her yet. But you're right. Sotomayor I think she sort of fancies herself the new Justice Ginsburg, don't you think?
Wow, that's
it's sort of the conscience.
I almost laugh at that just because I feel like that's not.
But isn't that what she's trying to be? Sort of, she's the most forceful leftist voice on the court.
I don't think you're wrong to think that. I don't think that those would necessarily be my choices in terms of how I would describe her. But I wouldn't quarrel with your with that assessment. I would say regarding Justice Jackson, as I think about it, to me, here's how I would sort of couch the discussion. Any issue you can name, if you tell me about the issue, I feel like I can give you a near 100% correct guess on how Justice Sotomayor is going to rule on any claim, controversy, or ruling, because I think I know her biases, and they're very strong. And that is not at all true for Justice Jackson. There are many issues, perhaps most even, where I would say to you, I don't know. Because
of course she does. She hasn't been there long. So
that's the thing, right? There's not enough data.
No, yeah. Right.
So I think we do have the data on Justice Sotomayor about her, I don't want. So here's the funny thing. So I don't want to kind of tag her and say I've judged her and say that I know that she's using politics as a motivator. I don't know what's in her little motivational heart. What I do know is the result of her judging is the same as, Tim, somebody who judges from that perspective.
Well, let's put it this
fundamentally
way.
Identical.
Let's put it this way. I know any issue that has any political implications at all. Okay, I do not see any leftist, liberal, whatever you want to call them, progressive justices, including the Justice Breyer is no longer on the court. I haven't seen them a single time vote against the way you would have expected them to vote.
Yeah, well,
unlike, for example, the gay marriage ruling that legalized it across the whole country and considered it a constitutional right. Yes, exactly. And that decision came down to, wasn't it Alito that cast the deciding vote in favor of that?
We do seem to have a...
Didn't he write the opinion? So in other words, you do see some breaks in the line on the center to right of the court, most distinctly John Roberts, of course. But on the left, I can't think of a single time that a single justice really surprised me by joining forces with the constitutionalist justices on an issue of significance. I'm
the record-
open to hearing if you can find me any example.
Well, just for the record, Alito was in dissent in Obergefell.
Okay, who
And
was
it was Justice Kennedy who
Kennedy? That's right, Kennedy.
wrote the
right? Kennedy
who wrote the majority.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And of course, Kennedy was famously flexible. I mean, he was right of
he was
center.
a California Republican, right?
Right.
Isn't that the
Right. But the point is, you don't get any, RFK Jr. Democrats, for example, right? You don't get any Tulsi Gabbard Democrat types on the court. They're all, in other words, no matter how they feel personally, which we can't tell, they always march in lockstep on major decisions.
So one of the criticisms from the right and libertarians against the liberals and the left on the court and in the judiciary is that they're too results oriented and results focused, and that one of our big criticisms of them actually has to do with them coming from a place of charity towards the people that they're judging, right? So it's not that they are, we do the opposite, I think, a lot of times than they do. And I say we and they, on the libertarian side, which is that we already ascribe to them positive motives, that they want, they don't want student debt relief to pass because of their contempt for the Constitution. They want it to pass because of their brother love for humanity and these people who have, big debts that aren't convenient for them. So I get that, and we
the Constitution, the Constitution really serves as a, shall we call it a seatbelt or a safety belt, which is supposed to protect the country. But if you try to lurch too forward with it, it'll stop you, right? So
I think that's an interesting metaphor there. I appreciate that. And that's sort of what we've always been like, so like just take an argument that's passionate that we haven't talked about yet today, which is the gun control argument. They don't want kids to be murdered in school shootings, which is why they want to ban AR-15s. Right. Now, there are those of us who know that AR-15s are protected under the Constitution and that banning them won't have an effect, I think, on those school shootings. But we don't, I take it as a given that most of the people who are arguing for that are actually, they have a noble motivation, right, to kind of stop that. And I think the same is true for the delegation question with respect to these, and also affirmative action, which we can talk about another case, Tim, with potentially blockbuster political implications. We've seen since the announcement of the opinion, the NAACP and the progressive sort of black left has gone, whole hog in criticizing it as an implement of racism. Right. Let's go ahead and take a listen. As a matter of fact, we'll delight ourselves, I think, Tim, with a listen to Joy Reid from MSNBC.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
And her presentation.
I can only imagine. Oh, Joy. Joy in the morning.
Here we go. The aptly named.
Well, let me just be clear. I got into Harvard only because of affirmative action. I went to a school no one had ever heard of in Denver, Colorado, in a small suburb. I didn't go to Exeter or Andover. I didn't have college test prep. I just happened to be really nerdy and smart and have really good grades and good SAT scores. Right. But someone came to Denver, Colorado to look for me. A Harvard recruiter flew to Denver.
Now, I think it's to Harvard's credit that we learned, Tim, that the only reason that they accepted her was her race. Because if we have paid previous attention to Ms. Reid, we might have thought.
Well, that's true.
Harvard produced.
I would be appalled if they admitted her for her personality.
I love that. I love too that she says it was her race that got this done, and then I didn't go to Andover. Well, what about all the white kids that didn't go to Andover? What about them? Why didn't they get a
her. And I met up with her at the Village Inn restaurant and did a pre-interview to get to pull me into Harvard. I was pulled in, and the schools like Harvard and Yale that I got into affirmatively.
Yes.
And it was literally not saying we're going to take an unqualified person and put them in Harvard.
Yes,
we're going to take a very qualified person who we would never know existed and put them in Harvard. That's how I got there. That's how Ketanji got there. That's how Justice Jackson, I should say, Justice Jackson got there. It's how Clarence Thomas got there.
Right.
But the minute
Clarence Thomas did not attend the Harvard University, by the way.
No, I went to
Holy Cross.
that's right.
For undergrad and
That's right.
Yale Law.
Right.
So, and I love her dropping Ketanji like they're pals. It's so
Right.
funny.
Oh, I mean, Justice Jackson.
Right.
That's good. I like
arrived from my majority Black little town, Montbello in Denver, to Harvard, the first week or two that I was in class, my presence was questioned by white people. I was in this big conference class where some white students stood up and said, those students, the Black students, they're only here because of affirmative action.
By the way,
Which
things
is
that never
true.
happened. I'll take things that never happened for 1,000, Alex. I love the way she says it. Like they were in the middle of a biology class and they stopped the discussion of, deoxyribonucleic
Excuse me,
acid. Just to stand up and shout across the
those
room.
Black people,
Right, those
they're-
blacks don't
they're
belong here.
only there
It's
because they're
outrageous.
Black. Yeah.
I mean, it's just preposterous. And of course, it is true, though, that she didn't deserve to be there, excepting the color of her skin. That's what qualified her, by her own admission.
Well, I know. I think she's though, but I think she's also saying here that she is nerdy, smart, got good grades, good SAT scores. I think there's some merit to what she said about how she had all those qualifications academically, but they never would have even heard of her
Tim,
if it wasn't.
how
for
many white people
affirmative action.
from her class year in high school thought they had the goods, and when they actually got the note from Harvard that laughed at them when they found out that they were not the nation's best candidates, because that's who Harvard gets to accept because they have such a pull. They get to accept the very best from around the country. And it would be no surprise to me that white people who, were stellar in their neighborhood, in their school, for instance.
Well, this is I know exactly what you're saying. This is the biggest problem of all with affirmative action, beyond the constitutional issue of providing favoritism for one group over another. And that is that when it comes to affirmative action, what it has done, and let's just be honest about it, white people look at Black people all the time and say the only reason he or she is there is because they're Black. And
all people look at affirmative action grantees with that. By the way, that could
true,
be
and
sexually based as well. It could be age based. There are a number of different.
And it strips the person of their dignity if people automatically assume they're only there because of the color of their skin. So the people that are worthy of the positions they're in, who happen to be people of color, now are looked down upon because of affirmative action.
They are not
in a
the biggest
way.
beneficiaries of affirmative action. They're the biggest victims. Let's get back to Joy.
And it became a huge argument that we all ended up having. This was freshman year. I had never had my academic credentials questioned. I had never had anyone question whether I was intelligent until I got to Harvard. And it was a defining...
Until she was elevated based on the color of her skin and not
we
her
don't know
achievement.
what her academic credentials were.
Well, she said she was from a small Black town or neighborhood in Denver, and that she did well academically.
Right.
And the reason why she never had a question before is because she actually did well. She was granted the benefit of her achievement because she wasn't elevated because of her race previously.
Point of my experience there. It's why I really was one of the many reasons I was miserable there my freshman year.
Yeah.
You feel completely out of place and people keep telling you you shouldn't be here. And yet some of the people I went to school with, were far less smart than me or the other black folk there. They got in because their daddy and their granddaddy. I went to school with somebody whose name was on one of the buildings. You're going to school with people whose names are on the buildings, who are third and fourth generation legacies, whose parents pumped money into Harvard to get them in. Mm-hmm. But that affirmative action is okay with this majority. They said that the people who benefited from slavery, their descendants, who are so far ahead of black folk in terms of opportunity that we'll never catch up to them. I don't care how many Oprahs we get. Those people's affirmative action is A-okay because those people can pay for fancy trips for them.
Yeah. But all right. So I wanted to.
I can't disagree with a lot of what she said.
Oh no, you.
Honest with you.
Oh well,
really
here's why you have to disagree with it, Tim. Let me just tell you, the thing that is just preposterous about that, and it's part of Joy Reid's. Did she go to law school? Hold on, I have to check right now. It's just driving me crazy. I hope not. She no, just a Harvard undergrad. By the way, 1991 with a concentration in film studies, according to Wikipedia. A
PhD in film studies is
the reason why I just can't stand her reporting on this. It drives me kind of crazy. Well, first of all, I think it's hilarious that so many on the left have reacted with a sort of like, we can't have affirmative action. Let's take away legacy admissions from these crackers. It's sort of like the
but that's not entirely true. For
revenge play.
For example,
hold on. Let me make my point here just for a second but the Supreme Court did not review other non-merit-based admissions.
They can't just come out and say, by the way, send us a case on this.
You know what?
Because we want
legacies, that's cool. Legacies are fine. Oh, and you know what else? Athletic scholarships and admissions, those are cool. Musical instruments, I don't know about. Drama. No, they didn't review all the different ways in which people are admitted and say, and it's just such a damnable lie. That's part of the politicization of the courts that I think we have to.
Don't you think we're going to see a slew of challenges to legacy admissions now?
Oh, well, there is. So there has been a
and frankly, I got to be honest with you, having grown up in a class, so to speak, where legacy admissions were not uncommon, I always found it appalling that somebody could be taken in strictly because their father, grandfather, whatever. I applied to Princeton, and I'm glad I didn't get in because I didn't deserve to. My father went to Princeton. My brother went to Princeton. They were both, excellent academically. So, there wouldn't be a problem with them being slipped in through the side door. But there's so many other people who are admitted only because of the reasons that she said. So I think it's a valid argument to be made in a vacuum. And it's not just the left that's doing it now. One of the thought leaders among the candidates for president in the Republican Party is Vivek Ramaswamy. And he has made a point to say, and there's more discussion about it now, that he would do all that he could from the bully pulpit to end legacy admissions and affirmative action admissions, because both of them do not offer a level playing field to the average middle-class Joe who comes in looking to be admitted.
Government schools, for state schools, I think that legacy admissions should be just banned by regulation or law. We could do that immediately. There's no reason to give consideration to the daughter or son of a state university alumni over a person whose parents did not attend that school. For a private school, though, they have many good reasons that have nothing to do with race to allow and encourage legacy admissions, namely their endowment, to create a team.
Exactly.
They want, so I having known some of your family history, like I know that your dad is on Team Princeton, okay? And they benefit massively from him being on Team Princeton.
Yeah.
We've talked before, I think very briefly though, about his like continually supporting, their mission, and by that I mean stroking checks to various university organs and endowments, and in spite of them behaving in ways politically that would turn his stomach, so to speak, in terms of if he really knew what they were preaching and instilling values into these undergrads that are anathema to what he thinks is the right way to go. But he's got
I asked him once. Yeah. I asked him once, I said, so what do you think of Cornell West? This is when Cornell was I shouldn't say Cornell was at Princeton because those are two Ivy League schools. When Cornell West was a professor at Princeton, I asked my father what he thought of him.
Does Brother West not still hold a position at
it's just horrible. And I said, yeah, okay. So how's that going to affect your annual contribution? And he didn't have an answer for it. Now, look, some alumni are pushing back, and there's organizations that are doing good work at trying to organize alumni to withhold until the radical wokeism that has overcome universities these days can be mitigated at least, but I also have another view on this, which is it's ironic that I would take a sort of real world results oriented view on affirmative action when we just talked about how it was all the leftists on the court who are interested in results rather than the way that you get there. But if you took away the need for diversity on campuses, in the view of university presidents, boards of trustees, etc., Asians would dominate the student body at Harvard and at many other universities to which they aspire. So you would have, in an ideal world with no favoritism, either for legacies or for affirmative action, you would have campuses that were disproportionately Asian. Asians are what, maybe 15% of the population, and don't quote me on that, but they would have 75, 80, 85% of the student body. And that is not the kind of student body I think that people generally want. Look, I mean, if you're a Christian and you go to a Christian college, an evangelical college, you know exactly what you're getting, and you know what the limitations are in terms of the various things that go along with that. But if you go to an ordinary university, whether it's Salisbury State or Villanova or Syracuse or Penn State or whatever it is, don't you kind of want a campus where you meet a lot of different people from different walks of life? Isn't that a big part of the university experience, which if it was all Asians who admittedly they overwhelm even white people academically, these campuses, the high-end campuses, Ivy League campuses, would be largely Asian. And I don't think that's the kind of college experience that sort of animates most people who want to go to college. I mean, they want an education, but they also want to meet and interact with all different kinds of people.
Yeah, so I'll address that last point in a moment. Before I do, I want to say that I think it's very much incumbent upon all who discuss it, and us now, that whether or not legacy admissions are a good idea, and whether or not legacy admissions are prohibited by the Constitution of the United States or the Civil Rights Act of 1964 are two very different questions. And,
certainly.
And those are being merged today in the sort of popular media.
I can't argue. Let me make it clear. I cannot argue with the constitutional case against affirmative action and the court ruling it's absolutely proper. But it does present us with a real conundrum, which is how do these colleges generate diversity without preferential admissions?
Well,
I don't know.
So let me just say this too about the constitutional issues. We treat race, because of our legacy of slavery and its legacy, different than other forms of discrimination in this country. You're allowed to discriminate. If a college wanted to have only people who were 6 feet tall and greater as members of their student body, they would be legally allowed to discriminate on the basis of height in college admissions. And
Well,
they could do that.
then I would have got into Princeton.
That's true.
instead
You
of
could
Penn.
have. And I would have worn some boots and got in.
But you know what? Just to put
well, hold on. I want to pound that point.
Yeah,
So I want to make because of course our mission is to discuss liberty, and our sponsor, LibertyNation.com, Tim, the people's source for conservatarian news and analysis 24/7. To explain, sort of how our governing system works. And one of the things, the reasons or how it works is race is a very special classification that gets the most scrutiny possible from the courts.
Mm-hmm.
It's most likely to be stricken down. It's not allowed because of the insidious legacy of judging people on the basis of the color of their skin and how awful that is. And so the idea of tying wealth and privilege to race-based decisions like it's the same thing, constitutionally and legally speaking, is right out. We don't have that. And the Civil Rights Act of 1964 basically says you're not allowed to use non-overtly discriminatory means in order to produce a discriminatory result. But it doesn't ban all processes and procedures that result in a discriminatory result. You can have, if you need to have somebody, you could have like let's say there was you wanted to employ somebody who spoke Gaelic, and you found out that fewer black people in America spoke Gaelic than white people, right? Well, you could still hire somebody to speak Gaelic, even though the applicant, you're not going to get the same number of black applicants as you are white. For instance, there's no way to kind of say, let's be equal about it. All we can do is require non-discrimination. That's how we eventually.
Yes, exactly. That's the court's role. That's the role of our judicial branch of the government, is to determine this stuff. But the question is, in the cultural context of this decision and the consequent, well, let's get rid of legacy admissions too. This is a earth-shaking decision in the sense of these colleges have been promoting affirmative action basically from the time I first was going to college and before then in the early 70s. So it's really been a 50-year legacy, and to change their course of action for these universities is going to be very difficult.
Tim,
Plus,
the NAACP started a campaign this week. I'm going to write about it for the pages of LibertyNation.com. It's called the Diversity No Matter What campaign. Now let's think about this just for a second.
Okay, there you go. Okay.
In the wake of a Supreme Court decision that says we're not allowed to have affirmative action because it's racially discriminatory, this organization dedicated to fight racial discrimination and advance the cause of blacks in America says no matter what, meaning it's a direct affront to the Supreme Court case.
Well, maybe they could contribute to the constructive dialogue by taking the expression colored people out of their name. What do you think?
The U.S. Supreme Court
NAACP is National Advancement of Colored People. Now, don't you think they could change that in 2023? Or
quality,
because they're
accessible
so
education
famous
should not be manipulated or weaponized to further racist agendas. That's what the NAACP says.
So
they
there's
say,
the presumption that any ruling against affirmative action has to be based on undiluted racism.
Well, that's the funny thing. They say our future depends on black children having access to high quality education and for our community to have access to sound hiring opportunities. America can only thrive when black America thrives, period. So what they're saying is thriving equals special preferences based on race only. And without special preferences based on race, this is the message of the NAACP, that blacks cannot succeed in education or in employment.
That is the most dismal, discouraging, negative, pessimistic possible interpretation.
When your view is indistinguishable from that of the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, and you're a spokesperson for black advancement, you might want to go ahead and check yourself.
Those are pretty much the bookends. I mean, they really are. And look, here's the thing that they don't realize and they don't care about, because they have a political agenda for the here and now. But think about what it will be like. This isn't going to go away overnight, but let's say 10 years from now, 15 years from now, and you can't quantify this, but 10, 15 years from now, maybe so many white people won't be looking at black people in jobs or universities and saying, they're only there because they're black. What does that say for the dignity, ultimately, for black people writ large, that they need to be recognized for their skill and ability, not for the fact that they're getting their job only because they're black? That creates a dangerous cynicism, which we've seen running through society, an understandable cynicism, that this should be able to largely end eventually. And then the dignity can be restored to, rank and file black people.
To any person
who just want to get hired and go to college,
who
like everybody
achieves
else,
on the basis of their talent and results, rather than some other category. I wanted to circle back around for a second to your discussion about like sort of majority Asian campuses, and that I think would be true and might be true for the very most elite campuses, and that's simply a testament to their academic achievement. And if people want to go to a school where they have, there's a minority of Asians, they can just go to State U, presumably, and have a very diverse experience of meeting people from all over. But if you want to go to where the people are doing the very best, and Asian kids have achieved the very best, results in terms of their testing and academics, well, then I say that's the reality we have, and more power to those kids. And we will actually be better off from letting those who have done the work to achieve.
Ultimately, of course, that's
absolutely.
True. Yeah.
By the way, what's one of the things that we don't talk about? What have we been denied as a society for the achievements of those people who would have done presumably better things if they were afforded the best minds to work with and learn from, that have been denied? Because we have Joy Reid occupying a spot at Harvard instead of the Asian kid she stole it from, or Harvard stole it from and gave to her because of the color of her skin. And now we have to suffer her on the TV too because of it, in part, Tim. So it's we're burdened as well by this.
So let me ask
legacy.
You a question. Okay. And to me, it's fairly straightforward. To many others, it may not be. But, in this era where there's active talk about reparations in California, actually with Gavin Newsom promoting the idea of reparations for every single black person in that state, which of course creates an unbelievable new bureaucracy and entitlement. But be that as it may.
Yeah. Also, I want to learn what counts as black too. That's
the
question.
point. That's people arguing over. Also, is it just descendants of African slaves, or is it any person who's using the old definition, who's 1% black or more constitutes
One drop,
black.
one
right?
drop,
One
rule,
drop
Tim.
of black
Yeah.
blood, right, was the old standard. So affirmative action undeniably resulted in the elevation of many black people and women and other minorities, including Hispanics, to positions they wouldn't have, to places in college and to jobs, occupations, careers even, that they wouldn't have been able to before. It undoubtedly has created a good deal of wealth within the universe of Black America. It has created success, it's created wealth, it's created a sense that, oh yes, Black people do this and that and everything else, which maybe 50 years ago, like I didn't see a Black person doing this or that before. So given all of that, do you consider affirmative action, and this is a psychic thing, not so much under the law, but do you consider affirmative action to effectively have been reparations?
Oh, well, no. First of all, I don't think you can give reparations to, like, actual reparations are about the person who's been wronged.
Well, I
not some,
understand,
like,
but
six generations later. Yeah.
Okay, the
Well, no,
moral
yeah, no,
equivalent
I don't.
of reparations.
No, because all it did was benefit, very, very few people, and actually wasn't even a benefit to them in the greater sense, meaning
Very few people, really?
yeah, in terms of the actual number of Black Americans, right, who went to Harvard. Like Joy Reid is and actually it's funny because
But it's not just Harvard. I mean, all the way down the line, people follow affirmative action. So somebody, let's just take Ohio State University, some sort of, large state university with a large student population. I pretty much guarantee you the percentage of Black students going there is much higher now than it was 50 years ago. It's not just Harvard and Princeton.
Let's not rely on my judgment about it, Tim. Let's turn to Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court, Clarence Thomas, for his thoughts on the matter. And he thinks that it's damaging. So Clarence Thomas he went to Holy Cross College, which we mentioned, and we have every indication that he earned his spot there through academic achievement, and we have every indication that how he performed at that school may have entered him to Yale on merit, and if not, he would have gotten into some other, you can hate Clarence Thomas all you want. You cannot say that his legal scholarship is that of a man who doesn't have the intellect to perform at the highest levels of constitutional analysis and jurisprudence. That just simply, that dog won't hunt.
Which presumably also applies to Ketanji Brown Jackson.
I absolutely, I think I've said on this program that it's possible that she merited consideration outside of her race and sex. Mm-hmm. One of the perversions of it. And so actually, I don't think...
Exactly. Yeah. You're making the exact point, which is, oh, well, we all know why Ketanji Brown Jackson is on the court. But, so that's what I talk about, the dignity of Black people that has been stripped by affirmative action. Of course. Because the default assumption, honestly, in so many white people's minds is, oh, well, they only got that job.
I just keep wanting to correct you, Tim. It's not white people's minds. It's everybody's mind. Everybody knows that the Black kid at Yale Law School probably got in because he's Black, because that's what the numbers suggest. And that's what Clarence Thomas says, that when he got out of Yale Law School, instead of being feted by, with plum job offers and interesting work for a lot of dough, he was given this nothing, scraps, the dregs, because the market discounted his degree. They knew it wasn't the best of the best, which is what they think of when that, for the other Yale Law, for the Joy Reids, when she graduates from Harvard, that degree is discounted because they know the Joy Reid didn't earn her spot at Harvard. She earned it because of the color of her skin. And if you don't want somebody at your job who's there just because of the color of your skin, then why the hell are you hiring Joy Reid? Because that's all she is. She's a color. That's
what Justice Thomas talks about how damaging affirmative action is because it implies both to black people and to everyone else that, look, we got to give them a little extra edge because, they're not really smart enough to do it on
The
their own.
NAACP says they got
what
nothing.
Liberal politicians are telling.
They got nothing except for preferences. It's just so disgusting and disheartening. But I think we're on our way out of it. I think this is really a great thing.
It's an escape valve, but the steam won't escape fully for several years, I'd say.
Or a generation even. It's funny when you were talking about the achievements of the kind of beneficial aspects of affirmative action. You were talking about creating certain wealth and positions for people, and you hadn't seen that. Well, here's what we didn't have. We didn't have a chance to see what would have happened without that kind of thumb on the scale for certain folks.
But to which they would say that was the only way we were going to take the thumb off the scale. They'll say white America, the power elite, had proven over decades, if not centuries, that they would not provide equal opportunity for people of color. That would be their response, that affirmative action was like the only way that they could get a fair shot.
Well, it's not a fair shot, and thankfully, it's over. We'll see about the legacies. One of the things about the legacies, Tim, is the left has fully captured academia. So the idea that somehow, if they want it, then just do it. They're all, who controls whether Harvard continues legacy admissions or not? Those folks are not going to the RNC conventions. They're not Trump voters. They're not MAGA. They're not even Mitt Romney voters, for crying out loud. They are all,
or John McCain. Even worse. They're the even vote for him.
Ultra progressives. Or they're probably not even Biden voters. They're probably Elizabeth Warren supporters or something like that. But in any case, let them do it. That would be a great thing. But let's not do it because of a compulsion in the law. The law doesn't require that, and certainly the Constitution doesn't demand it. All right, let's turn our attention for just a moment before we let you go to your summer activities and get a check in on the political situation outside of our United States Supreme Court judgments. You wrote a piece for LibertyNation.com, Tim, the sponsor of today's podcast, saying, can Ron DeSantis recover his mojo? I didn't realize that he lost his mojo. Why don't you tell us about it?
Well, you can set the stage back in, November of last year when Ron DeSantis won a shockingly one-sided landslide re-election as governor of Florida. At the same time, Trump was sort of stumbling through a not very well presented announcement that he was running for a third time. You put all of that together, and also DeSantis's incredible strength in culture war issues and his success in Florida. And he was the hottest ticket in town. November, December, all of the mojo was with him. He's the guy that can succeed Trump. He's the guy who can beat Trumpism without Trump. In other words, all the policies without the personality problems. It looked like his presidential bid, which was just a matter of time, was going to be, that he was going to be at least on equal footing with Trump, if not perhaps even inevitably set to overtake Trump because of what happened on January 6th in the 2020 election and all the other stuff. Well, a funny thing happened on the way to the nomination for Ron DeSantis, and that is Trump got arrested, and then he got arrested again. And so many Republicans and conservatives who were really open to another candidate, like DeSantis or Tim Scott or Nikki Haley or someone else, suddenly said, we can't back down now. We have to support Trump because he is literally being targeted by the federal government as a political enemy, and they're trying to throw him in prison. We can't let them get away with that. And the way to express that is to continue to support Trump, which leaves DeSantis and everybody else sort of out on the edge. And so it's all the publicity's been around Trump. And together with DeSantis's woeful rollout attempt with Elon Musk, where nobody could even connect for 30 minutes, ultimately tens of millions of people did access that announcement, but it was perhaps too little too late. It gave the sense that DeSantis sort of not ready for prime time. In addition, his culture war stuff has struck many as being maybe extreme and maybe a bit too overheated, which has given Trump, strangely enough, the opportunity to position himself as the more moderate, more centrist, he says, Republican, candidate for president, which has given Trump an opening which he would probably never expected to get. And of course, he's attacked DeSantis as a swampist, a neocon.
So he's going to run to the left of DeSantis in the primary.
Yes, he is going to run to the left of DeSantis. He thinks abortion, that the 6-week ban in Florida that DeSantis proposed will cost Republicans a tremendous amount of votes. So he thinks it should be more like 15. He hasn't even, Trump said what he specifically wants. He's been kind of vague on that issue. So put all of those things together, kind of DeSantis not appearing not necessarily to be ready for prime time, plus the big factor, which is, Trump's arrest, and everybody on the right, not everybody, but most people, sort of closing ranks behind Trump. So DeSantis, from a point in April, well, it was actually March, he actually beat Trump in one poll by CNN, and he had polled within a point or two in others. That was in March. 4 months later, here in July, Trump is 30 points ahead and shows no signs of faltering because, look, he's been arrested twice. So what bad thing could happen to Trump that's going to take his numbers down? And what do you do as an opponent of his or a rival in DeSantis when your opponent keeps getting arrested and his numbers keep going up? What do you do? So he
Real
has
Clear
lost
Politics poll reporting as we record on the 6th of July.
about 30 points on the average.
The Trump is plus 44 on a July 30 poll. Oh, that's Ohio. Nationwide plus 34. Fox News plus 30.
In other words, it's not
and another
competitive
one
at this point.
Yeah.
And all the other candidates are running for VP, essentially, except for DeSantis. Now, of course, a lot of people wanted to see a Trump-DeSantis ticket.
Yeah.
I don't think that's not going to happen because neither of them would
Emerson
go
had
for
it at Trump plus 38 on
it's not competitive.
mid-June.
And I think Trump probably won't even debate. I don't think he should from a political standpoint when you're 30 plus points ahead of a field of a dozen candidates. You don't want to sort of put yourself in the middle of a bunch of political
I think as
midgets,
citizens,
as you see them.
Well, you're totally right from your political analysis perspective. As citizens, we should demand
Yes, I
that
agree.
these bastards, no matter who they are, get in front of each other and hash it out. And the idea that any of them can hide, whether it's Joe Biden and his,
I agree.
but basement campaign or Donald Trump from Mar-a-Lago.
That's
no bueno.
tradition, though, that, sitting presidents don't debate, period. I don't know that I mean, Ted Kennedy, when he challenged Carter wouldn't give him a debate.
Yeah.
Pat Buchanan, George H.W. Bush, Bush 41 wouldn't give Buchanan a debate. So they're doing, Biden and Trump, assuming he doesn't debate, are doing the right thing politically. But you know what? We're in a time where Trump has thrown out the rule book for politics. And so there should be pressure on Biden because he has a viable, a serious person challenging him in RFK Jr. Look, he's got roughly 20% of the vote. In the Republican primary, DeSantis has maybe 20% of the vote. So RFK by the numbers is just as viable in a sense as Ron DeSantis is.
I have a irrational affinity for the debates too. I have to kind of lay that out on the table because being a good debater or good performer in a presidential debate probably has literally zero to do with being a good president of the United States, or near zero, right? Like, it's kind of weird that we have developed this method of choosing, which sometimes involves this thing, which...
And it's because we see them, it's one opportunity to see them under extreme duress.
Non-scripted. At least some of it, the reaction is non-scripted.
If it's
less
scripted,
and less so.
If it's scripted like Al Gore, you can't sound scripted like Al Gore did. Right.
Yeah. So is it all over but the crying then for DeSantis, or is this just still early and who knows?
Well, I think the other thing is with him is the whole presentation it's not as effective on the national stage as some might have thought, as it has been in Florida. I'll use a small example. Remember Glenn Youngkin and his famous red sweater vest, which was sort of his signature during his campaign. It sent just the right message. He was kind of
the governor of Virginia for people who
governor
don't
of
know.
Virginia, yes. And it became famous and a signature thing for him, and it really worked well. Well, Ron DeSantis now has taken up that idea, but what he's using is like a dark blue shirt that looks like he's a plumber. It has like DeSantis for president on the...
Seriously? His
on
name
the
on a
front.
shirt? Really?
It looks like a work shirt. Yeah, it looks like...
I hate that kind of affect in any... I hate it always.
But it
Let the
isn't
man wear a
good
suit
either.
and tie. You're a president. Would John Fetterman's now going to drive our stylistic choices?
Oh boy. Well, when DeSantis comes out wearing gym shorts
oh God,
and a hoodie.
Yeah. All right. Let me ask you a question. Here's the exit question. DeSantis is a stock. Are you a buy, sell, or hold on him? His candidacy.
I would hold.
All right.
I would hold only because it's such an uncertain political climate. And for all we know, Trump could actually be in prison, which would change the...
Hey, man, that's the best position to be in as a
again.
candidate, right? That your opponent could be incarcerated. Who knows?
Isn't
Let's just wait and see.
this where you always point out that Lyndon LaRouche ran for president?
Indeed. Democrat candidate.
Yes.
For the Democrat nomination, by the way.
Yes, let's make sure it was for the Democratic.
Yeah. As a libertarian, it's always
nomination.
important to differentiate because some folks think he's that, which he never was. So, all right,
no.
We will leave it there and pick it up with you next week, Mr. Donner. Thank you so much for joining us.
Always
Bye-bye.
a pleasure. Thank you, sir.
We are the Uprising. Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are libertynation.com.
That's it for this edition of The Uprising. Remember to hit Liberty Nation News for original articles, LN Radio, and our signature television program, The Conservative 5. Just go to libertynation.com on your browser or hit Rumble, YouTube, or check out our Liberty Nation News Roku channel. I'm Scott Cosenza. Thanks for joining The Uprising. This program is a production of libertynation.com, where truth is making a comeback.